Hello, I'm author and publisher Mark David Welsh, and welcome to Cult Cinema Review. 2 weeks ago, we discussed Bela Lugosi in White Zombie, and I mentioned then that there was another of his key early performances that I had only ever seen the one time, and many years ago. So it was high time for me to reacquaint myself with that film. And what better way than to check out the Eureka Masters of Cinema Blu-ray edition of Island of Lost Souls. Island of Lost Souls was a 1932 Paramount Pictures adaptation of H.G. Wells' novel The Island of Dr. Moreau. And after almost 90 years, it's still the best film version of the story. Events begin with the rescue of shipwreck survivor Edward Parker, played by Richard Arlen, who is plucked from the sea by a freighter carrying a cargo of live animals to a small, uncharted island under the supervision of disgraced physician Montgomery, played by Arthur Hole. When the drunken captain starts abusing one of these strange-looking crew members, Arlen intervenes and is thrown overboard into Hole's boat once the animals have been transferred. Now, the captain sails away at this point, and this leaves Arlen in the dubious hands and hospitality of one Dr. Moreau, played by Charles Laughton. Now, if you're even vaguely familiar with the source material, you'll know something about what Laughton is up to in his island paradise, turning animals into people by experiments informed by vivisection. His crowning glory is the Panther Woman, played by Kathleen Burke, who he presents to Arlen as a native islander, hoping that the two will get on and possibly mate. When Arlen's fiancée, Leo Hyams, arrives looking for him, the good doctor plans to mate her with one of his beastmen instead. And events move swiftly from there to an explosive and fairly shocking climax. Obviously, the Paramount studio was looking to cash in on the sudden success of these so-called fright pictures and had already scored big with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in 1931, which had earned a Best Actor Oscar for star Frederick March. But they rather overstepped the mark with this one, which is good news for us, but was bad news for the studio. The overt themes of bestiality, sadism, torture, and a man trying to play God pretty much ensured that the film was going to run into some serious censorship problems. It was banned outright in Sweden, in 14 states in America, and remained unseen on UK screens until 1958, when it was only issued heavily cut, with all the references to Moreau having created the Beastmen removed, which must have been kind of confusing for anyone who saw it. Now, if all this fuss seems a little puzzling today, it's worth remembering that back in 1932 at least, Darwinism and evolution was still a topic of widespread controversy, and I guess they still are in certain quarters today. Part of the problem with the film is Laughton. He's just too damn good as Moreau, outwardly a gentleman, but with every smirk and gesture suggesting a barely suppressed depravity and an all-consuming obsession with himself and his work. Now, I've not seen all of Laughton's films by any means, but I have seen quite a number of them, and he is consistently excellent in every single role that he plays, however different. Now, it does seem that he was able to pick and choose his projects, as I'm guessing that his great success on the stage meant that he wasn't forced into a studio contract and accepting poor quality scripts. I do have a copy of Simon Callow's biography of the actor, but I confess I haven't read it yet. But when I do, I'll review it and confirm if that assumption is correct or not. None of the other cast get much of a look in, of course, although it's worth mentioning that Arthur Hole really makes something out of his role as Laughton's alcoholic assistant, providing some subtle understatement and much needed contrast. The studio wanted a complete unknown for the role of the Panther Woman and ran a nationwide campaign to find her, a contest that received over 60,000 entries. Eventually they picked Kathleen Burke, who was allegedly working as a dental assistant at the time, although it was far less publicised that she had acted on the stage before and also on the radio, but I guess the complete unknown provides much better copy. She does give an interesting off-centre performance, although how much of that is intentional and how much down to her inexperience before the cameras, we can only speculate at this late date. She never had much of a career afterwards, never escaping the shadow of the role, and her only other really notable part was in the Lionel Atwill 1933 shocker Murder in the Zoo. But what of Lugosi, I hear you cry? Well, he was only hired onto the picture after Laughton had finished all of his scenes, the times they seem to appear together being down to some sharp editing. He plays Moreau's sayer of the law, the Mad Doctor's lieutenant among the beastmen who keeps them in line. So it is Bela who gets to intone the famous "Are we not men" lines, and he gets some great close-ups as well that really showcase the intensity he brought to what was otherwise a pretty minor role. Commentators have made much of the fact that Paramount took advantage of Lugosi's financial problems and paid him a low wage on the picture. But the fact is that he only worked a few days on it and was paid at the same rate as the rest of the supporting players. But of course, it's a crying shame that he doesn't get more to do here. Similarly, there are some wonderful production stills of the Beastmen makeups by Wally Westmore. And yes, what we do see in the film is very impressive indeed, but we don't see really enough of it, with a lot of the creatures only shot in semi-darkness. And that brings us neatly to the really bad news. The original negative of the film is lost. This Eureka Blu-ray from 2012 was compiled from 3 separate sources and all existing footage, but there is a level of grain and damage to the picture in some scenes. It's not enough to spoil your enjoyment, but I couldn't help wishing that a clearer print was available. There is a Criterion Blu-ray edition as well, but it's not so readily accessible to buy. It does, however, have a commentary track which this Blu-ray lacks, which does seem rather a strange and significant omission. There are interviews with Laughton biographer Simon Callow and film historian Jonathan Rigby, as well as a smart 32-page booklet, but it's not a stellar array of extras by any means. As a film, I think it stops short of being a classic. Although a good brisk pace is always to be admired, I found this 70-minute film to be that rare beast, a movie that needs to be longer. Another 20 minutes or so with more story and character development would have made for a more satisfying drama, and given the shocking climax, more depth and resonance. And what could be better than more Laughton and more Lugosi? We could also have seen more of Karl Struss's excellent black and white photography and seen more of the Beastmen and their makeups. Still, this does remain quite easily the best version of the tale. The 1976 remake with Burt Lancaster was bland and forgettable, and the 1996 version was completely derailed by the unprofessional behaviour of actors Marlon Brando and Val Kilmer, although it does have to be acknowledged that original director Richard Stanley's inexperience with handling a major studio picture was probably also a factor. It's worth mentioning too that there have been a number of uncredited remakes over the years, and I have a real soft spot for one called Terror is a Man from 1959. It's not well regarded at all, but I really enjoyed Francis Lederer's performance in the Moreau part, although he's called Dr. Gerard in the film. Obviously Lugosi fans will want to see this because his moments are truly memorable, but they aren't extensive. It's Laughton's show all the way. Worth watching? Yes. Worth owning? Definitely. But a bit of a little step down from some of the real classics of the period. There is a sense of an opportunity missed. Journeyman Earl C. Kenton was in the director's chair for this one, and although he would return to the genre with some of the last pictures in the classic Universal monster cycle, it's a pity that this project didn't end up in the hands of a more visionary director. Well, that's it for today. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and please join me next week for another Cult Cinema review. And in the meantime, stay safe, stay well, and don't be a stranger.